I also regret our continuing involvement in an unwinnable war in Ukraine. Why has it gone off the agenda? Is it because we're not winning? Joining me now is Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos, who is one of the smartest people I think I know. Marcus, there's a compliment for you. You're pretty much a leading British historian, analyst, and you know a lot about Russia. Marcus, good to see you again. There aren't many people talking about the Ukraine situation at the moment. Why not?
Well, the principal reason as to why the Ukraine war has drifted away from the headlines in recent weeks is because the British establishment's coalition of the willing was nothing more than an elaborate yet pathetic exercise in propaganda. Now, let us closely inspect the British establishment's coalition of the willing. Firstly, coalition of the willing is typical language of British officialdom, namely grand sounding with no practical meaning whatsoever. Secondly, who exactly is willing? I can assure you, and I can assure your audience, that the British people, along with the French people, the German people, the Italian people, and so on, are most certainly not willing to go to war against Russia, and are most certainly not willing to risk nuclear Armageddon. So the question remains, who exactly is willing? Well, it is abundantly clear that it is the British ruling elite and the European ruling elites who are willing to go to war with Russia and who are willing to risk a potential nuclear war with Russia. Thirdly, the British ruling elites and the European ruling elites will, of course, not go to Ukraine themselves to fight, and they will not send their sons and daughters to Ukraine to fight. However, they will send other people's sons and daughters to Ukraine to fight and to possibly die. Fourthly, if Britain had a free and independent media, then the following question would have been put to the British establishment and its chief puppet and useful idiot, Starmer, the following question: how can Britain possibly send significant forces and hardware to Ukraine to potentially fight against the Russian army when the British army has only approximately 20,000 combat-ready soldiers and only 25 or so main battle tanks? That question in itself should have been the emphatic answer to refuting anything that the puppet Starmer said about a coalition of the willing. And finally, Lembit, if the British ruling elites are intent on sending soldiers to Ukraine to fight against the Russian army, then perhaps Charles III and the puppet Starmer can emulate King Leonidas during the Battle of Thermopylae by leading us into battle against the Russians. Of course, the reality is that, as I said moments ago, coalition of the willing was merely an exercise in propaganda aimed at trying to derail the Trump administration's attempts to find a peaceful solution to the war in Ukraine, and secondly, to try and distract the British public from the horrific problems which are devouring the United Kingdom. After all, the British establishment, of which the monarchy and the aristocracy are at the heart of, has gone to war with the British people.
It's very eruditely put. I've had a look myself, and it looks to me that, well, we have 25 tanks. Russia has something like between 7,000 and 10,000. 7,000 and 10,000. I don't think we're going to win Why is it that we have such a bunch of klutzes in European political roles that they don't call out Starmer because he hasn't even got the military firepower to pretend he could lead a coalition of the willing?
Well, first of all, let me say that Russia, all in all, when it comes to tanks, they have readily available and in storage something in the region of 26,000 tanks. So that is something we should be very aware of. Also, Russia is a nuclear superpower. Russia has the largest and most potent nuclear arsenal in the world. As regards the European ruling elites, let us not be under any illusion whatsoever. The British ruling elite and the European ruling elites are two sides of the same coin. They are at the heart of what I call the Western ruling elite, or what you could also refer to as the global deep state. The German ruling elite do not represent the German people. The French ruling elite do not represent the French people, and so on and so on. They represent themselves, and they represent the people whom they are beholden to. After all of these politicians in Britain and in continental Europe are not in the positions they are on account of merit. No, they are in the positions that they are on account of them being willing to do anything whatsoever to satisfy their masters, being the Western ruling elites or the global deep state, or in the case of America, what Donald Trump refers to as the American deep state. So that is why the German establishment and the French establishment simply went along with the British establishment's so-called coalition of the willing.
Nothing, of course, has happened. This is the thing. This coalition of the willing hasn't actually done anything. They have meetings roughly once a week when they talk about it. It reminds me of a phrase which I learned, I think, when I worked in industry. Such a coalition consists of individuals who individually can do nothing, but collectively can agree that nothing can be done. And it seems to me that there is no prospect whatever of these very low-grade politicians convincing a European just about managing public to spend 800,000 million euros on fighting a war in Ukraine.
I must draw a historical analogy. Shortly after the end of the war in Europe in 1945, Churchill mooted the idea to the British military leadership of a surprise attack using British soldiers, American soldiers, and 100,000 former Wehrmacht soldiers against Soviet forces in Eastern Europe, and then to invade Russia, or what was then the Soviet Union. Now, that was known as Operation Unthinkable. Britain's generals went away to consider it, and Alan Brooke, who was the chief of the Imperial General Staff at that time, reported back to Churchill that his idea is, quote, unthinkable. In recent weeks, we heard that Britain's senior military leadership remarked that Starmer's so-called coalition of the willing was nothing more than, quote, political theatre. There will be no foreign troops in Ukraine. The British establishment, along with the establishments in continental Europe, number one, do not have the military capacity for a war against Russia. Russia is a military and nuclear superpower. Secondly, they know that Russia will not tolerate one single foreign soldier in Ukraine. So the puppet Starmer referred to the coalition of the willing as being, quote, peacekeeping soldiers. How could they be peacekeeping soldiers? Because after all, peacekeeping soldiers mean they have to come from countries which are impartial. Well, Britain, France, and Germany has hardly been impartial in the war in Ukraine. So there will be no foreign soldiers in Ukraine. Some 20 years ago, Lembit, I warned in articles, in speeches, on television and on radio, that there would be a war in Ukraine, that Russia would go to war over Ukraine because of the aggressive steps that NATO was taking on Russia's western border. Ever since the Russian military campaign began in Ukraine in February of 2022, I have said, Lembit, and it pains me to say this, it will be resolved on the battlefield. Whilst I fully support the Trump administration's efforts to try and bring a peaceful end to the war in Ukraine, the reality is that Trump is not fully in charge of America, not yet. The deep state remains entrenched in power in America. They control, for example, the CIA and the military.